in the online portion of the classes, whether I'm web augmenting or using a flip model and hybridizing the course fully, I use several levels of assessment. So I would start with guided practice. Here's some information. Here's some questions about that information, or here's a description. Can you find that part on this model? That kind of very low stakes guided practice, and you do use points from that. That's what holds them accountable for doing the activities and coming to class prepared. Then we have quizzes, and sometimes the quizzes are more testing for me than they are for the students. You want to, when you set those quizzes up, you want to be really careful to make sure that you set them up so that they work the way you want them to work. And Colt will help you with that. So the quizzes are low stakes testing. So they're not summative yet. They're formative evaluations. They're more high stakes than the guided practice, but they're not as high stakes as like a midterm, which is summative evaluation. So what I do with the quizzes is I make a large pool of questions so that everything I want them to know is somehow covered in that pool of questions. And then I let Blackboard randomize that for me.
Well, this classroom, this online hybrid / classroom was developed a couple of semesters before I started teaching it. And the quizzes were online. There was a lot of quiz. I guess there was a quiz for each chapter, and so I just went ahead and used those, and they worked well. But for a hybrid, for this format, this type of student, they were graduate students that really needed presentation skills because they were leaving from here and filling in the roles of leadership in the civil service area. And I felt like taking the quiz is really not, I mean, it shows me some of the understanding, but not really. So I felt like I needed to incorporate, and this goes back to the being flexible about the material, is I needed to incorporate a lot more presentations. And so what I did is I added some group discussions, I added some group presentations. So every week they would come in and they would discuss and they would present the chapter. Or different questions journals that I would give them. So different materials, and that worked very well for measuring their milestones, to seeing if they're really learning material versus a quiz.
When I select assessments, it's also kind of guided by the flipped classroom philosophy, but I do have a lot of informal, formative assessments in class, because the formative aspects of an assessment are such that it allows students to get some feedback as they're working through the hard stuff, especially if you're asking them to do a lot of higher order thinking. If you're asking them to analyze, to synthesize, to think outside a box, whatever the box might be, you want to guide that. So there's a lot of modeling involved, and so formative assessment it works best for that. Sometimes I grade it, sometimes I don't. Or I start them off and then I grade an online component that extends that learning. So that's the in-class one. It's a lot more, where do they need feedback to get started, to do the hard stuff on their own. And then online, I tend to kind of switch more to the summative, the formalized ones. And for me, a formal assessment is a project. It's project-based. I do a lot of project-based, a lot of performance-based, a lot of problem-based. But I don't do multiple choice exams because those are lower level in the taxonomy. So I want to be able to provide them with something that will really allow them to apply.
The assessments that I use, I do a lot of interactive activities. And so one of the things that I do both online and face-to-face. Face-to-face, I try to make sure that as much as possible is interactive. I want my students to learn who each other are, because if they're going to be online, a lot of times my classes are a third to a full half, sometimes, depending on the class, sometimes 2/3 online. So it's important that they learn to develop a sort of, to create establish a community among themselves so that they can put faces to names. And so time in class is activity time. Almost like a kindergarten class. So sometimes they're sitting in groups, they're doing small group discussions, sometimes they're working on a project, they're solving a problem, sometimes they're working on having to answer certain questions and then share it with the rest of the class. Sometimes they're actual hands-on projects that they have to do, presentations, these kinds of things. So I do very little lecturing in class. Now this has evolved. I have to say that at the beginning I did more lecturing in class and giving background, and then I realized, well, that stuff I can put online. And then really have a lot more sort of what I call playtime in class, which is where they learn. So, so the assessments in class are not always strictly graded, but they do have to show that they're sometimes it's a group assignment, and so there's an automatic, well, if you participated in this group, that. So the real assessment comes with the online portion, and so sometimes they may be quick quizzes that they do in order to learn terminology. So other times they are major assignments like putting a blog together where they have to do it over time. They have to do a literary analysis because I teach literature a lot, or they have to put together a kind of a project. They have to explain the life of an author. And sometimes it's in groups. And then that means that in face-to-face time, they actually get time to work within their groups for those projects. Those work really well because then you don't have students giving you the excuse, well, we couldn't meet outside. Well, you had time in class. So if class time is really about the interaction, then the nitty-gritty, the actual nuts and bolts can take place online.